In this video, you'll make your first API call to Stripe and learn everything you need to know about RESTful APIs. Many things in Stripe need to be done on your own backend server, like creating a payment intent, creating a checkout session, creating customers, etc. So we need a server that can listen to requests from our front-end code, handle whatever backend operations need to be done, then send the result back down to the client or front-end app so it can show that data to the user. That means we need to build an API that can handle HTTP requests. There are many possible ways to do this in Node, but by far the most popular is Express.js. It allows us to easily create a RESTful API. But what is a RESTful API, you might ask? Well, it's essentially just a set of URLs on the server. Each URL is related to a specific entity, and when you make a request to that URL, you can send a request method depending on what you're trying to do. There are many different request methods, but the only ones we'll worry about in this course are GET and POST. You make a GET request when you want to read some data from the server. For example, if we wanted to get all of the user's past payments from the Stripe API. In this case, we're just reading data, we're not modifying anything on the server. Whenever we create something, we send a POST request. For example, if we wanted to create a new payment intent, we would send a POST request to our API. Now, before we jump into the code, I would highly recommend that you have an HTTP client installed on your computer. I'll be using one called Insomnia throughout this video, but Postman is another very popular option. These tools make it very easy to send requests to your own API or directly to the Stripe API. A client like this is both great for learning and for just practical debugging. Let's go ahead and look at this in action by making our first request to the Stripe API. In the previous video, we created a customer on the dashboard. Let's see if we can now retrieve that customer from the Stripe API directly in Insomnia. Click on the plus icon to create a new request. Notice how you have the option between different HTTP methods, but in this example, we'll just want to stick with the default GET method. Now, in order to make a request to the Stripe API, we need to authenticate, which we do with our secret API key. We can grab our secret testing key from the Stripe dashboard, then click on the Authentication tab in Insomnia. We'll want to use bearer authentication, and we'll set up the secret token as the value. And now, we just need to figure out which RESTful endpoint we want to call. Here in the Stripe dashboard, you can see the customer record. Now, if we go over to the documentation to the customer section, you can see there's an option to retrieve an individual customer. Now, if you click on the code for curl, it will give you the full URL to this endpoint. You'll notice the URL is customers/the customer ID. Now we can go and paste that into Insomnia and send the request, and you'll notice that in this case, it sends an error back because that customer ID doesn't exist in our project. Now, if we go back to the dashboard and grab a customer ID that does exist and use that in the URL, you can see we get the full customer object back from Stripe. So that's how RESTful APIs work. Throughout this course, we'll be making requests to the Stripe API, but primarily we'll be doing that through our source code in Node.js. And having an HTTP client like this is very useful for debugging your own API, as we'll see throughout the course. In the next video, we'll set up our Node.js project and optimize it for reliability and productivity.